Hi folks, it's Professor DiBiase. Because you're wrapping up your annotated bibliographies and are starting to turn the corner into thinking about how you're going to make use of those sources for your final projects, we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about recognizing and avoiding plagiarism. We'll do this in two parts. So today I'm going to give some background and provide some examples for you to think about. You'll respond to those on Blackboard, and then I'll have a follow-up video kind of running through the examples and talking through my rationale followed with a couple other points about how to kind of avoid plagiarism moving forward. So today we're going to talk about what is plagiarism, why is it a problem, what are some of the consequences, how do we recognize it, and then actually in part two we'll talk more about the factors that lead students to plagiarize and what strategies and resources can help us avoid that. And I should note before we begin that one of the curious things about plagiarism is that it's frequently unintentional. So what is plagiarism? Sometimes we think about it as copying someone's work. Sometimes we think about it as not using quotation marks. Sometimes we think about it as failing to cite. I think a good sort of overall way of thinking about plagiarism and academic honesty in general is to think about it as the misrepresentation of another author's ideas, words, or thoughts as one's own. So taking some other author's ideas or words or thoughts and presenting them in such a way, intentionally or otherwise, that leads the reader or the viewer or the listener to think that they are your own ideas, words, or thoughts. So why is it a problem? Well, with respect to academic honesty, in the academy, right, in university life, ideas are a really valuable commodity. We build our careers around the quality of our ideas. Certainly teaching is important too, but our research, our scholarship, the ways in which we publish that scholarship or present that scholarship at conferences is really key to building our academic brand, for lack of a better term. And so issues of people making use of our material without consent or without attribution is really problematic in terms of establishing ourselves as credible scholars. So what are some of the consequences of plagiarism? Really briefly, right, plagiarism can result in anything from failure of an assignment to failure of a course to expulsion, depending on a university or its policies. But at bare minimum, you're likely looking at something like the failure of a particular assignment. And that can be significant, and that can accrue over time. And of course, issues of plagiarism get reported to your dean and can have sort of longer lasting consequences as well. So how do we recognize plagiarism? I think this is kind of the big paradox. Lots of people think they know what plagiarism is, but students still frequently plagiarize, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And I'll pause here for a moment to note that I would suggest, in terms of the cases of plagiarism that I have dealt with, both as an instructor and as someone who's been responsible for handling plagiarism cases at the college level, that almost 90% of those cases are unintentional. Almost all of the cases that I run across are issues where students didn't really intend to plagiarize or did not intend to try to deceive an instructor, but because they misunderstood what constitutes plagiarism or because they made use of kind of sloppy habits, they put themselves in a really problematic situation. So here's what we're going to be doing. If we were doing in this class, I would put you in groups and you'd have a chance to discuss these in groups. But because we're doing this online, I'm going to run through a couple of different examples. All these examples are pulled from my experience as an instructor. I've changed some of the details, but the cases in general still hold. And what I would like you to do as I move through these examples is to jot down whether or not you think the example constitutes a case of plagiarism and provide some of your rationale. And then after you've gone through all 6 of the examples, I would like you to post those thoughts into our Blackboard discussion thread for this week. So this week, there's going to be less of an emphasis of jumping in on other people's comments, though you're certainly welcome to do so if you agree or disagree with somebody's reasoning. But otherwise, I really want you to simply focus on posting your argument for why you think a particular example is or is not plagiarism, and we'll take it from there. And then in my next video, I'll sort of review the responses that you've given and sort of break down the degree to which the class is kind of on the right track. So let's move through the examples, and feel free to pause the video as you're doing your writing. So the first example, a student includes a quote from a source, so maybe it's a scholarly source, an archival source, but they don't put the quote in quotation marks. So as an example, they might write something like, in Holland's article, she argues that autobiographical memory has not received adequate attention. I'll give you a minute to pause, and then when you're ready, we'll move along to the next example. Example 2. A student paraphrases a portion of research, so they restate the paragraph or the quote in their own words, but they do not include a reference to the paraphrased text, so they don't provide a footnote, nor do they provide a parenthetical citation. Example 3. A student in an intermediate level history course includes a paragraph from a paper that she wrote last year. So maybe she had written a paper for a history class in the previous year. She's covering a similar topic in her current course, and so she decides to make use of a portion of that paper as she's putting together a new paper for this course. Example 4. A student cuts and pastes a large section of a Wikipedia article into his paper without referencing Wikipedia. And I'll note that when you're thinking about this question, I want you to leave aside for the moment the question of whether you should be using Wikipedia at all for the purposes of this question. That's really a separate issue. Regardless, the student has taken a large section of Wikipedia and put it into their paper without referencing Wikipedia. And again, you're going to write down, is it or is it not plagiarism, and why or why not? And this one I think it'll be just fine on. Okay. Example 5. A student taking courses on American politics and American literature writes one paper on the influence of literature in politics and submits it for those courses. So the student is taking 2 classes during the same semester and decides to write a single paper to submit for both of those courses. Is this or is this not plagiarism? And if so or if not, give me some of your reasoning. And then finally, example 6. A student who regularly writes and edits Wikipedia articles includes a section of an article she wrote in a paper without referencing Wikipedia. So this is an article that the student wrote, but she's including it in the paper without referencing the fact that it came from Wikipedia. So what I'm going to have you do again is, after you go through these examples, review them, think about whether or not they constitute plagiarism or not, and then provide a little bit of your rationale for why or why not you think they're plagiarism or not. And you'll add that to our discussion thread on Blackboard that will be going up shortly. And then next week, we'll kind of revisit these examples and think about whether or not your reasoning was correct. And if not, why maybe it wasn't. So take care, and I look forward to seeing your responses.